SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
Are you tired of dents and scratches ruining the look of your car? Look no further than Porter's Body Shop in Brookhaven. Call us at 601-833-1861 or visit us online at portersbodyshopms.com.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth Studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music on this
Friday Eve.
Well, the NPR chief was on the Hill yesterday. She was... I know somebody's going to get mad about this, but I don't care. We're just having fun here, dadgummit. Lighten up.
Lighten up, Francis.
She was playing the dumb blonde role.
That's really going to get some people's dander up.
It's all in good fun.
Joking forever.
Yeah, that's true. It's all in good fun, folks. We had somebody the other day that got mad at us for mocking someone's appearance. And, of course, we...
Have y'all seen me? I can poke fun at anybody.
They failed.
I'm a big old fuzzball.
You know, we were, of course, describing. You made the point so perfectly, which is this was all self-imposed. We weren't mocking.
Good Lord didn't dye her hair bright pink.
Right. And put those dumb glasses on her head. Oh, my gosh, and the crazy little earrings. But nonetheless, the NPR chief, what's her name? She was up there on the Hill yesterday. This has been a long time coming, hasn't it? We shouldn't be paying for this crap. And she was asked.
Catherine Marr.
There it is, yeah. She just kind of presented as your run-of-the-mill, pompous, sanctimonious, arrogant liberal, did she not? I'm smarter than everybody here. That's kind of the impression she tried to project.
And just in case liberals listening weren't aware, that's how y'all come across.
That's absolutely
just
true.
Insufferable.
That's totally true. And you know what we say in the sales business, don't you? Perception is reality. You can try to spin it any way you want, but it ain't working. So she goes to the Hill yesterday to testify, and I thought the questions were great and very pointed, very succinct, very relevant. And she was asked about whether or not she had any registered Republicans on her staff. She said, well, I don't know about registration. I'm paraphrasing a bit. You can help me out here if I get this wrong. Well, I don't know about registration, but I do know we have some conservative team members. And whoever it was that was asking that question actually researched it. Of course they did. You knew it was a rhetorical question. Nobody's going to ask a question like that without having the truthful data in their hand. Well, it turns out you don't, that everybody on your staff is a registered Democrat, like 97 of them or something like that. Are we shocked when you consider the content?
Not at all.
Right. So, seems like she would have known that. I will give her some credit. She did a little mea culpa on the Hunter Biden laptop situation. Yeah, perhaps we went a little light on that and should have jumped into that more. You think? But you know what? Only because the evidence is overwhelming. It wasn't then, but rather than say...
It was then.
It was right, but rather
I just didn't
than,
want to admit to it.
I think you're right. Rather than executing their charge of being somewhat investigative and curious at a minimum, isn't that what journalism's all about? I'm no journalism person, although I guess you could say I am doing the show every day, but it's an opinion show. But I'm talking about just pure journalism.
Yeah, you're never going to hear me claim to be a journalist.
Right. And
mainly because of the bad name they've given themselves for the last 2 decades.
True. But is not one of the tenets of journalism to be curious?
Supposedly. I think that's been replaced with activism, though.
You're so right. Well, is it fair to say she and her staff are not curious about the Hunter Biden laptop? They should have been. That was kind of interesting to watch that go down. I took a little perverse pleasure into seeing her squirm a bit over these issues. I think most of us would say, you know what, do we need this organization? And if the organization is of value, well, then go get George Soros or some other wingnuts to fund it. Not my taxpayer funding.
They don't even have the one piece of leverage that people still, for some reason, like to use.
What's that?
Well, if you don't fund public broadcasting and NPR, then you don't have Sesame Street. It's like, hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Sesame Street went to HBO like a decade and a half ago.
Right.
They haven't had anything to do with public broadcasting or any of that.
Right. It's. I don't think we need it. I'm just going to tell you. I just don't think we need it. What do you think?
I mean, in reality, the tax dollars that go to it are only a portion of their budget. So
that's right.
Cut it out.
Yeah.
If they can support themselves without it, go for it. Because obviously they're not doing any good for society. They're providing a slanted viewpoint at the tax dollars' behest.
I think more importantly, the message here, just like it was with all the executive orders the president signed day one that essentially prohibit all this DEI stuff being central in policy making for taxpayer-funded organizations. That's the point. I think the point is you got an NPR, a PBS that do receive grants, and a large part of their revenue is sourced from taxpayer funds, but they don't really represent and even offer multiple points of views. I could halfway understand it if you had some degree of balance. Of course, that's very subjective, but it's all about promoting a narrative, an agenda, a set of talking points. That's what I think most people object to. I certainly do. I don't want it just to be a left-wing talking piece that gets its money from my taxes. Worse yet, as I've pointed out numerous times, about 40 cents of every dollar that comes out of the Washington and for any purpose outside of Social Security and Medicare is borrowed. That's how bad the situation is. Borrowed. It makes it even worse in my view. It's even more important that we eliminate all this crazy spending because we're having to go into debt to cover it. That makes no sense whatsoever. But no doubt there are changes in the works in Washington with respect to the way money is appropriated. The other big news, we knew this was going to happen yesterday. The president made this very clear. He said tariffs are the most beautiful word in the dictionary, and he loves them. And so he announced a 25% tariff on imported autos. Now, that's not only the finished good vehicle, what you buy on the lot there, but it's all the parts that are used in the building of automobiles. So even if the company that makes the vehicle is located within the borders of the United States, it is a domestic manufacturer, if it imports parts, they cross the border, tariffs are levied on those parts. Now, I did a little research on this. This is interesting. We buy about 16 million cars a year, all types of passenger vehicles. And in this country, about half of them are made completely abroad. About half within the United States, domestically. However, how about this, Rhino? About roughly half of the components in the domestically manufactured vehicles are imported. So when you do the math there, it results in about 25% of the total finished good vehicles sold in this country are fully American-made. Assembled here and use American-made components, parts. This is going to really rock the auto world for sure. We got more on that on the other side of the break. Also, Christina Dent joins us, founder and president of End It For Good at 11:05. At 12:05, Senator Daniel Sparks is going to talk about PERS.
From the Super.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's do this.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Let's go.
Back in the Element Wealth studio. Thanks so much for joining us. This is one of those days, Rhino, where the now infamous stock market rhino kangaroo is exhausted right now. I mean, it is hopping around like crazy back and forth on that unchanged line numerous times just during our first segment. And that's because the markets, investors are trying to consume and determine what these tariffs mean. Now, I got to tell you, after that happened yesterday, that being his announcement of the president imposing a 25% tariff on imported autos and imported auto parts, I felt surely we're going to see a big old sell-off. And we didn't. Talking about it in futures. And I think that's because we've already had a significant sell-off. I think the market's already baked in these moves with respect to tariffs. And there's still a whole bunch of money on the sidelines, as you know. There we go. The old kangaroo just jumped from positive to negative again. But hang on. I'm sure it'll be back up. So I think a lot of that's already figured in to market and investor attitude and sentiments. The NASDAQ is up as well a bit. I think it's a buying opportunity in the NASDAQ. Oil still sitting around $70. Really hasn't moved significantly in quite some time. $70 a barrel. Yep, Dow down again. And haven't checked the funny money today. What does that look like?
Let's see here. The latest on the funny money, it's at 87,345, so it's up about 1%.
Okay. So Bitcoin kind of staying in that mid to high 80s range for a while seems to have.
I'm convinced 80 is the new floor on it.
Okay.
If you see it go south of 80, something's wrong.
Well, that, of course, all the investor wants look at the support, is what they would call that. That just means the number of people and the amount of money, more importantly, that was invested at that level. That tends to offer what the wealth managers call support, and that wait. Once it gets to that point and it busts through that, that's when they start selling because they're trying to avoid losses. But as long as they got a bunch of money invested at that level, they just sit tight, wait for it. And I think that's kind of the mood we're sort of in right now for a lot of investors, but still a whole bunch of money, cash, sitting on the sidelines, waiting to jump in.
And if you look at the graph, 80 is about the midway point of that big push when it went from trading in the 50s and 60s to over 100.
Right. Yep.
So if it's right there at that midpoint of that big push, then you had a lot of people buying in at that point at the 80 price point.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So, and that it doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin or stock equity positions.
Right.
Equity positions. It's all the same. That's how it works. And that's the kind of stuff they look for. So with respect to the tariffs, I think we had a couple of questions. How will this affect Nissan in Canton and Toyota in Blue Springs, says Alan. Well, I think Nissan, let's talk about that one first. Their challenges are global in nature, and it's more of a function of just a struggling business and a business model. Their sales. I mean, name of the game is selling, and they're struggling from a sales perspective. Their vehicles seem to have lost some degree of popularity. They're not among the top 5 or so in terms of brands that sell in the United States and globally as well. So that's the concern with Nissan. It's a global problem. It's not necessarily specific to the Canton facility. Here's what I'd say, though. If for some reason Nissan makes the decision to shutter the Canton facility, I think the prospect of replacing that Nissan operation with a different automobile manufacturer is high. I mean, it's purpose-built to manufacture vehicles, so it's ready to go. And the tariffs, I think, would serve to stimulate that. Because the goal, and Mr. Trump's made this extremely clear, the goal is to revive automobile manufacturing within our borders. He's basically saying, hey, he said it. I'm paraphrasing a bit. All you got to do is make your cars here, and you're exempt from the tariff. That's what he said. Now,
I wonder if that does happen, should they even approach Kia or Hyundai, since the city of Jackson's suing them?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a problem that was misguided, to say the least. Toyota, last I checked, Rhino, #1 selling vehicle brand in the country. Check me out on that. I think it's #1. And so they're, as far as just a maker's brand. Is that what you see? Yeah, that's what I thought. #1. So I
it's
really...
not even the one you would think.
What is it?
It was the RAV4.
I didn't know that.
It beat out the F-Series.
Yeah.
Beat out the Camry.
I'm shocked at that. Yeah, no doubt. So I think it's safe. Now, what we don't know is...
No, wait, I'm looking at this chart wrong. It didn't beat out the F-Series.
Okay. Because that's also big time.
It beat the F-150. It didn't beat the whole series.
The whole series. Gotcha. Makes sense. Well, I don't know if that's a valid comparison if you think about it, right? One specific model versus a category or a group. But nonetheless, it's #1, Toyota. That's what most Americans buy in the country. So what we don't know is at the Blue Springs plant, I'm sure somebody does, but how much of the parts used in the final assembly of the vehicles that roll off the line at that plant in North Mississippi come from abroad and are subject to these tariffs, and how it would affect that. But the fact that they're being assembled here already somewhat protects them, in that if they incur higher costs to make the vehicles, it's a function of the imported components not the entire dang thing. Like Volkswagen, I want to say, is one that is got serious headwinds as a result of this. They sell a lot of vehicles in the United States, but they don't make a lot here. And their BMW, I think, is another one. They have some manufacturing here, but a good bit of their manufacturing occurs overseas, and so this is going to be a bigger financial burden to them. The Nissan plant, back to that. Because the expectation is that an increase in American manufacturing of vehicles will result from this policy. You would think the Nissan plant would be, if it shutters, and I don't know that it is, I'm just hypothetical here, if it shutters and Nissan says, yeah, in the interest of scaling back, cutting costs, etc., we're going to shutter the Canton plant. You would think that you put a for sale sign on that thing, there's a lot of other manufacturers that would be interested in it, automobile manufacturers. It's ready to go for the most part. I mean, it's certainly better suited than starting with a shovel in the ground. I mean, you're certainly further along in that respect. So you would think that would be an asset in demand, a marketable asset. So that would be the positive aspect of the tariffs, because even though I'm with Mr. Trump, let's bring the manufacturing back here domestically, I think we have to be honest. You just don't snap your fingers and a car plant shows up on a piece of land. It takes a while to do that. And it's a massive investment as well. So relocating facilities that are presently abroad into this country by American-based manufacturers. Now, I'm talking about European-based manufacturers, but what I think we will see is European-based manufacturers. The BMWs and Porsches and Volkswagens.
They've only got up to go.
Right, exactly.
I'm looking at the NHTSA.gov breakdown of the of February 2025, and like take for example BMW. The highest percentage vehicle of a BMW made in the United States is 32%. That's the BMW X4.
Okay.
The majority of them are 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 6, 0, 8. Like it's all single-digit percentage points.
Yeah. So might this drive a surge in domestic manufacturing of automobiles, and might we see foreign manufacturers start to build factories here? And remember, the other proposal is a 15% corporate tax rate as well for stuff you make here. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Mississippi, Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is on
SuperTalk Mississippi.
Diablo Motors had a hell of a sale downtown yesterday. Word got around, no money down, take years and years to pay. When I got there, the lot was bare, but the salesman said, hold on.
Back with you in the Element Wealth studio, 601-879-4395. That's the C Spire text line. Today, on In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar, you'll hear an interview with Peter Nimrod. Nimrod. That's hard to say. Pardon me for that. Who not only serves on the Mississippi Levee Board, but also owns the legendary Sherman's Restaurant in Greenville. That's Peter Nimrod. In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar is presented by Superior Catfish. Remember, there's catfish, then there is Superior Catfish. It's U.S. farm-raised catfish with homegrown flavor. Ask for it by name at your favorite store or restaurant. Go to SuperiorCatfish.com for more info. You can go to myelementwealth.com or call 601-957-6006 to let Element Wealth help you find your balance between income, growth, and guarantees. Just quick check of the markets. Oil still hanging around the $70 a barrel mark. Let's see, all the indexes are now in the red for the moment. The Dow down 108. Still trying to process the impact of the tariffs, I think. Yeah, the NASDAQ down 13 points. On the C Spire text line, Thomas in Greenwood says, you think GM and Ford are going to bring manufacturing back to America and give up that slave Mexico wage? I'm not sure, Thomas. It's a good question. Rhino and I have talked about that. Rhino did the research for us, determined that the wages for the average auto worker in Mexico per day are below what the average is per hour in this country. And again, I just think about this because of my business hat here. You got to add on about 15-20% of what we call payroll burden because of the cost of maintaining employees. It includes payment of Social Security taxes, Medicare taxes, insurance, other benefits, vacation. I mean, there's a lot of other costs associated. I'm going to go out on a limb here, speaking about paid time off, what's now referred to as PTO. We used to call it vacation and sick time. Now it's PTO. That the average worker in a factory in Mexico doesn't receive quite as generous paid time off as one would in this country. Just a guess. Now, when it comes to Europe, that's totally different because, you know, Rhino, they take more time off than they work in Europe. They're a big believer in your leisure time over there, right? That's why they lag and don't produce a whole lot. You know, what they are good at is taxing the ever-loving snot and suing American companies. Well, we can't create that here. We'll just confiscate some of their wealth or make it so dang hard for them to operate here. We'll receive some sort of compensation for the privilege of them doing business in our country. It's true. Every day you turn around, it's a new lawsuit against one of the big technology companies. It wouldn't shock me if they just woke up one day and said, okay, we're done. We're not doing business in the EU anymore. Now, I understand how that would not be taken very well by their shareholders, but we're headed to that point if the dadgum EU done back the heck off. It's ridiculous.
The EU is a good example of just how squirrely and stupid some of our gun laws are, though. Because, I mean, in the European Union, there are some countries where if you are allowed to own a firearm, if you are going to the range that day, you have to contact your local law enforcement and let them know which rifle you're carrying to the range and how much ammo you're taking with you, what time you'll be leaving, and what time you'll be getting back. Then when you get to the range, you'll have to tell them, hey, I got to the range, I'll be here for this amount of time. You got to do all this to check in with them throughout your entire day wherever you're going.
Right.
But you don't have to jump through any hoop whatsoever to get a suppressor.
Unbelievable.
In fact, it's faux pas to not have a suppressor if you're going to be at the range or going hunting in Europe because well, there's not a whole lot of land, so it's loud.
So true.
They consider it hearing protection. But over here, the people making the laws were convinced by cheesy 80s action movies that you could hear a pin drop with a silencer.
Oh, man. So, you may ask, well, how does this affect the retail price of vehicles? They're estimates somewhat at this point because you don't know how much of this will be absorbed by these manufacturers who pay the tariffs. And let's be clear about that. If you hadn't heard us talk about that before, American companies pay tariffs to the U.S. Treasury. They are imposed on goods imported from abroad, but it's the importer who pays the tariff, not the foreign country, not the foreign manufacturer. It's the American importer that pays that money to the U.S. Treasury. Most industry experts estimate that the surge in price as a result of the tariffs will range from $3,500 to $12,000 per vehicle. The one popular vehicle that I've thought about, you see a lot of them around here, Rhinos, the Chevrolet Silverado. I wasn't aware until all this tariff stuff popped up that those are made in Mexico. And the 25% tariff could result in a roughly $12,000 increase in the retail price. Again, it just depends on how much does GM absorb of that and how much do they pass on, because they're the ones who's paying the tariff on the vehicles that they're making in Mexico. When they cross the border, the tariff is levied on General Motors. Will they shut down their Mexican plant, as Thomas points out, move it into this country where the labor will be considerably more expensive? So even though you moved it to avoid the tariff, you still are incurring higher costs. Now, as I've said many times before, I believe the next generation of factory, I don't care if it's automobiles or widgets, whatever they're making, not going to be as labor intensive. It's going to be highly automated. And
which I would imagine that is the 30% of the Silverado Sierra line that is made in Korea.
Okay, yeah, I bet you're right about that. I hadn't thought about that. So
this American Automobile Labeling Act report is just fascinating.
Because
it breaks it down in the vehicle type, the percent that's made in the U.S. and Canada, the percent that's made in other countries, and that's labeled by country. And I had no idea that a single percentage of manufacturing of Rolls-Royce automobiles took place in the United States. It's 1%, but that's still higher than I would have thought it was. I mean, I know we've got the Rolls-Royce maritime plant on the coast at Pascagoula.
I think that's right.
But I didn't think they had any auto manufacturing.
I hadn't thought about that. So some of the components, evidently, made here, shipped abroad for final.
Some of the Land Rover components,
okay,
you wouldn't think would be made here. They're made in America.
Interesting. Well, again, we'll see where this goes, but I think we'd have to expect that the price of vehicles is going to go up. And again, are American companies going to relocate manufacturing facilities here? And are foreign automakers going to relocate their plants from other countries into this country to avoid the tariffs and to enjoy, which would be in some cases, lower taxation, lower corporate taxation? Something else that surprised me, and you and I have talked about this many times, just the manufacturing sector and the number of jobs in that sector. I was a little surprised to learn that in the United States, it's less than 1 million involved in the automotive industry. Now, you would think just as big as the automotive industry is, that there'd be more people working in it. 900-something thousand. The other thing that does bother me a little bit about this is that the unions fully embrace this, right? Man, are they ever licking their chops. Oh, boy, those companies coming back here, and we're going to put the screws to them. You're going to pay me $200 an hour to work in your factory. That is a concern. And what I hope is that the factories say, we don't need your silly tail. We're going to do this with machines and robots. Be gone with you and your ridiculous demands. Old Sean Fain, remember, he's the one that we were all shocked at, spoke at the RNC. And basically his entire speech was nothing but a pro-union message. He didn't say a deadgum word about his endorsement of the president, the candidate for president on the Republican ticket at the RNC. He didn't say a word about that, right? All he talked about was how great his unions are in their shakedown practices. So I'm a little worried when you see a big union boss like that so enthusiastic and elated over this tariff announcement. This is going to be interesting to see how this affects the U.S. economy for sure. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Found me, found me, found me, found me, found me, found me.
Are we going to do this?
Middays with Gerard Gibert
Keep rolling. 3, 2, 1.
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Okay, so maybe I'm guilty of what I'm about to talk about here, because it seems like every day there's another story on this issue. And that's, oh gosh, when
dudes in dresses
compete against girls in sports. Here we go again. This time it's Oregon. McDaniel High School sophomore. I guess it's pronounced Aiden. It's Aayden. Gallagher. Just lapped the field, literally, in a track event. The distance between him and the female runners, I mean, it's like a football field. It's so ridiculous. 16-year-old 11th grader came in first place in the 400-meter and 200-meter races at the Portland Interscholastic League Championship. He was seen, you can see the video, I mean, just races by him. Of course he does. Previously competed as a 10th grader just last year in the same competition where he won. So, just a plain old high school student at McDaniel High School, Ada Gallagher. I love track. That's what he wrote on the article, of course, uses the pronoun she, which is incorrect. This is a deadgum he. Just lapped the field. 25.49 second mark. It's out there on TikTok. You can see it. Video of it. Just zooming by. This is insanity. Why is this happening in this country? Every day, there's another story. There's more craziness around this issue. It's just unbelievable. And the Democrats in this country continue to lean into it. So, an elementary school in Brooklyn, New York, is having an event coming up here in a couple of days. And they've got signage promoting it. Gender expansive families. And they even describe it. It's a propaganda party. Believe them when they say they're coming for your kids. Gender expansive families. What the heck is that exactly? I don't know. I don't know that I want to know. But there's no doubt these crazy people are coming for your kids because they know that's where they can have influence, because they're unsuspecting innocent children that you're corrupting with this garbage. It's evil. It's wicked to take advantage of the most vulnerable in society, to get your little way, as you like to say, to appease your little feelings. That's exactly what's happening, though. It just, regardless of what the president has done, and I think it's fantastic with his executive orders banning all this nonsense across the agency spectrum, threatening states, public institutions that receive federal money. If you continue to engage in these practices and promote this stuff and grant preferential treatment, you're not going to get federal money. So there's a county public library in Maryland. They're hosting, get this, an all-ages trans pride party where children can create pronoun pins. This is tax money paying for the grooming of children. Toddlers will create pronoun pins and be told that you can be whatever gender you like. There's a hospital. You've seen this one, Rhino, in New Jersey. that upon the birth, they have a birthing wing there, and upon the delivery of the baby, they send a questionnaire to the parents asking what the sexual orientation is of a newborn infant in this maternity organization here within this hospital. This is sick. You're asking parents to identify the sexual orientation of an infant. We're talking within a few hours after delivery. This is sick. It's just off the charts, man. I don't even know what else to say about it. But what really bothers me and what I get passionate about is the grooming of the kids and foisting this on children. Christina Dent, founder and president of End It for Good, going to talk about fentanyl after Fox News and SuperTalk News. Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays. We are live in the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday Eve.
We're pleased to welcome now Christina Dent, founder and president of End It for Good. So, Christina, since the president took office, and he told us about this the entire time he was running for the office, that he intended to close the border, and he was especially concerned about the flow of this deadly drug across the border, and talked regularly about how it was affecting the lives of Americans, and in fact snuffing out the lives, unfortunately, of many unsuspecting young people in particular. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, may be the number one cause of death of our young people in this country.
Death, yeah.
And so he has really demanded, and using tariffs as a method to get the neighboring countries of Canada, mainly Mexico, of course, to react and respond and be more proactive in stemming the flow of fentanyl across our border. But tell us about this. I don't really know a lot about it. All I've heard in the reporting of this issue in our country is that most of the young people that end up passing away as a result of a deadly dose don't even know they're ingesting it.
Yeah, so fentanyl has been a big problem, especially in the last couple of years. During COVID, it became a massive problem. We can talk about why that is. But first off, just what is fentanyl? It's an opioid. We've been using it medically for decades, since the 1960s. Anybody in a hospital setting who had surgery has been given fentanyl. It's never. It does not hurt people when it's given in appropriate doses that they can, in a medical setting. So that's happening every day in every hospital in Mississippi many times. What happened is the illicit market figured out how to manufacture fentanyl, and it became part of the underground drug supply, not just the medical drug supply.
Gotcha.
That's where the problem comes in, because you can't dose something that you don't have any quality control over. So people are getting whatever random thing they buy on the street. Maybe it has fentanyl in it. Maybe it's purely fentanyl. Maybe they don't have any idea how much it might have in it. And it can cause an overdose. So how does an overdose happen? Well, opioids decrease your respiratory rate because they suppress the part of your brain that controls your breathing. So if you take opioids and you take too much of them, your brain is going to forget to breathe. And if you take too much of that and you forget to breathe for too long, you're going to die. So it's important to understand why that is, because it's not like you just take too much and suddenly you just die and it's crazy. This is like a physiological happening that's happening to your body that your breathing rate decreases and you can't stay alive without air. So you can reverse that through the reversal drug naloxone. It flushes the opioids off your opioid receptors, allows you to start breathing again. But what's happened is fentanyl has started coming across. It started out coming through the mail system, mostly, coming from China. There was pressure on China to stop that flow. That flow did stop, but it just shifted. Now it goes through Mexico, often in the form of precursors that come to Mexico. Cartels there synthesize that into fentanyl, which can be made in a lab. So this is not crop dependent. It doesn't have to be in a certain climate. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have square footage and miles of land to grow this. You can make it in a lab anywhere in the world that you want to. So it's being made there, and then it is being smuggled across the border. Less than 1% comes from Canada. Canada is not the problem when it comes to fentanyl.
Southern border.
Yes, it's coming through the southern border, but, and this is what's really, really important and what I think we're missing in this conversation, 88% of the fentanyl that border security interdicts comes through ports of entry. It's not coming through the wide open spaces of land in between ports of entry. It's coming through ports of entry. 80% of it is coming through with U.S. citizens. So this is almost entirely U.S. citizens that are taking fentanyl through a legal port of entry because they are legal U.S. citizens.
For the purpose of using it, selling it, distributing?
Selling it.
Okay.
They get hired by cartels, and it's, I mean, if you think about, so the Border Patrol says that they believe they interdict about 3% of cocaine. It's the only drug that they give us a number of how much they think of the total amount that's being smuggled. They think they get about 3%. So let's say that they're as effective at getting fentanyl as they are at getting cocaine, which they've been, working on for decades.
Yeah.
And they get 3%. Well, they say that they arrest 75% of people that are trying to get across the border illegally. So if you're a cartel, who are you going to hire? Are you going to hire someone who has a 3% chance of getting caught or has a 75% chance of getting caught?
Okay, so wait a second. Is it against the law to bring this stuff through legal ports of entry?
Oh, yeah.
It's just not getting detected?
Yeah. There's just there are, millions of people crossing the border for legitimate reasons that are citizens, that are non-citizens, that are doing nothing more than just living their lives. They're on business, they're on vacation, whatever. And it's real. You can't search every single person that wants to cross the border every single time they cross the border.
Yeah.
And so you've got lots of people. They catch some of them. They don't catch most of them. And the reason why it is even harder to catch is because cartels are smart. They're business people. So they're thinking, how do we have the least amount of risk and the highest amount of profit? Well, we're going to send it through whatever means it is that is going to be the easiest way for it to get through. And that is with U.S. citizens through ports of entry.
I guess I'm a little surprised that, given how big a problem this is, that and to your point, it's impossible to physically search every bag and every person that's coming across, that there wouldn't be some sort of technology that has been invented that could detect the presence of this substance as it's moving through that checkpoint.
Yeah. No, and interestingly, so if you think about what was even easier to detect, which was marijuana back when there was lots of marijuana being smuggled across the border, which has basically ended now that states have legalized inside the U.S., it is not profitable for cartels to smuggle marijuana. That industry has just about ended across the border. But even for marijuana, it has a really potent smell. It's much easier to detect. And even all of our enforcement efforts, doubling the size of Border Patrol, none of that had an impact on the amount of marijuana that was able to get across the border. The only thing that did is when states began moving that market locally, which decreased the demand for cartel-supplied marijuana. People don't want to buy it from them. They just want to buy it from their local manufacturer.
All right, so help me understand then of the use in this country. Do you have any data that says, well, that's intentional use versus accidental use?
No, I have not seen any data on that, but there is a lot of intentional use. So part of the reason that we got fentanyl is before COVID happened and the travel bans happened, for emergency travel across the southern border. About 30% of seizures of fentanyl and heroin-related drugs were fentanyl. So only about 30% at that point was fentanyl coming across the border. Then we had the travel bans. We go about 2 years of that. By the end of the travel bans, we've got 90% fentanyl coming across. Now, why is that? Well, we squeezed the amount of drugs that could come across, and we know what's going to happen when we put pressure on the supply, which is drugs are going to get more potent because they're easier to smuggle. So people still wanted heroin, but they got introduced to fentanyl because it is about 50 times more potent than heroin. So you think about that from a market perspective. You can make one trip with fentanyl across the border, or you can make 50 trips with heroin. Well, from a risk perspective, you're going to make one with fentanyl. But it doesn't end there, because fentanyl is not by any means the most potent drug that could be coming across our border. Nitazines are already out there. They're 20 times more potent than fentanyl is. So let's say that we completely cut off, through some miracle that no one has ever done, somehow we completely cut off fentanyl coming across the southern border. Number one, people would just start manufacturing it inside the U.S. because you can make it anywhere. But number two, cartels would just start smuggling something else. There's nitazines. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of fentanyl and different kinds of things other than fentanyl that you can smuggle. And so this is a market issue. There is demand for mood-altering, mind-altering drugs, and cartels are happy to supply that. They're going to supply it in the least risky way possible for them, which is high potency, small packages. And we saw that COVID did exactly what we would expect.
Stay with us through the break and get your take on what can we do to effectively address this issue, because it just seems like, to your point, in my view, if people want to put this stuff in their body, they're going to figure out a way to get it. Somebody's going to figure out a way to sell it to them. So how do we address that problem? We got Christina Dent with End It for Good. We're coming right back.
At the
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
What? This is so awesome.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. We're visiting with Christina Dent. She's the president of End It for Good. So, Christina, this problem, it just seems like no matter what we do, just like the drug problem in general, we spent a lot of money, we've invested a lot in law enforcement, but the problem persists. I'm talking about drug abuse. The abuse of illicit drugs and harmful drugs persists. I think what's so scary about this fentanyl deal is that such a small amount of it can be deadly. And I guess I would ask the question of you, is border security going to solve this problem?
No, it's not, because it's not a border problem. It is a supply and demand problem. There's a lot of people in the United States that want to change the way that they feel. They can't do that through drugs that they can access legally, and so they're going to buy them from the underground market. When you have a market that's worth $500 billion a year, do we really think people are going to just allow that pile of money to sit there? No, they're not. They're going to supply whatever drugs either people want or whatever drugs they want to sell. And if people are desperate enough, they're going to buy whatever is available to them, even if that's not the thing they want. So if they were using heroin and their dealer says, hey, I'm all out of heroin, but I've got something else for you, and you're in withdrawals because you're already dependent on an opioid, well, chances are pretty high you're going to try that thing. And so now we have lots and lots of people who are using drugs that are now dependent on fentanyl, or they've developed a preference for fentanyl over heroin. It has a different kind of high for it. So I love that you're asking the question. When we step out and we look back, we've got decades of history now. We keep doing a lot of things and throwing a lot of money at it, and we keep seeing this is not helping. It's not actually solving the problem. I think that's because it is partially we're coming at it the wrong way. We keep thinking that more enforcement is going to stop either people using drugs or people selling drugs. But people sell drugs because there's an economic incentive to. There's a lot of money to be made in it. And people use drugs because they want to feel better than they do right now. So we can help on the consumption side by helping people deal with the deeper pain in their life. And on the market side, beginning to internalize the problem that the more you crack down on something, the more potent it's going to get, and the less control you have over it, and the more innovative the criminal market is going to become, and the more money is going to go into their coffers to use for all sorts of bad activity that none of us want. This is the path of drug prohibition. Now, do I want people randomly being able to go buy fentanyl in the, drugstore? No, that is not the approach. But we have got to begin figuring out how we can move some of these consumer markets back into maybe under the care of a doctor, maybe under very strict regulations, maybe only used in treatment. But we know what path this takes for us. When you prohibit a popular substance, it will move underground, it will become unregulated and higher potency, and it will fund criminal activity. We may not all agree on the solutions to that, but those are the facts that we know from Economics 101 is going to happen, and we're dealing with the fallout of that. And you see that it's not a border problem because most fentanyl is coming across the border with U.S. citizens at ports of entry. If we think about the number of people who are arrested trying to illegally cross the border, you have to arrest 12,000 people trying to illegally come across the border before you catch one who has fentanyl with them. This is not a problem of people trying to make their way across the border illegally and they've got a sack of fentanyl on their back. And I think that's a little bit of the image that we get sometimes from the news, is that that's sort of the problem here. It's not. We have U.S. citizens being hired by cartels to move fentanyl across ports of entry. And I actually talked to a guy a couple of years ago, and he had come out of this, but he had previously been involved in a pretty big marijuana underground activity in the United States. And he said, the way I moved my marijuana is I hired this old grandmother, just this nice grandmother who would drive her old, Caprice Classic across the country for me, filled with marijuana. And nobody ever suspected her because it was just this nice grandma driving her Caprice Classic down the highway. It's a similar situation. Cartels are going to look for the least likely people to move their drugs because they don't want them to get caught. So we got to work on that market side. On the consumer side, there's a lot of things we could do, even here in Mississippi, to deal with that. So one of those would be removing drug treatment centers from our Certificate of Need laws.
Which has been tried.
Yes.
But unsuccessfully.
Correct. We have far too big of a problem to be putting barriers up for more types of treatment to be available, more options for treatment. Mississippi's a rural state. People can't hardly get to treatment even if they can find a bed that they can pay for in treatment. So we can remove some of those regulatory barriers. There's also some really interesting new treatments for drugs, for drug addiction that are out there that could be brought here. Kentucky has a whole series of faith-based treatment centers that have been for about 10 years using this new technology called neuroelectric therapy. And it sounds crazy. You put these electrodes behind your ears it stimulates your vagus nerve, and it keeps people from going through withdrawal symptoms, and it resets their brain and their opioid receptors, and it can also be used for other drugs like methamphetamine. And it allows them to come back to a kind of the way that their mind was before they ever started using drugs. It starts working in about 20 minutes. So you can take someone who is in full withdrawal symptoms And within 20 minutes of having this thing on, their body calms down. They're able to have a normal conversation with you. There's no shaking. There's no nausea.
So I have acquaintances with a number of physicians in the local area, and I've talked to them about this. Now, they represent sort of a cross-section of medical disciplines, but they still have a very good understanding, more than the average person, of the human body and its physiological characteristics. They say some of us are just born with this addictive sort of DNA, or just a propensity to be more addicted to anything. It doesn't have to be drugs. It could be gambling or tobacco or virtually anything. And some are just less prone to addiction, can truly just do things in moderation and put it down and not be addicted. Is that something that maybe medical science is working on addressing?
Yeah, we do know that there is genetic predispositions toward addiction.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that you will become addicted. If you had, if your dad was an alcoholic, doesn't mean you're going to become one, but you do have a higher genetic predisposition towards alcoholism.
Okay.
You need to be careful with that. And some people say, you know what, I don't even want to risk that. I'm just not going to touch alcohol because I saw it be such a problem in my family.
Yeah, I know people like that. Sure, I think we all
sounds
have.
like a good plan to me. But we also know that the primary factor that causes addiction is what people experience in their lives. So if they go through a lot of difficult experiences, or even one as a child, a really traumatic event can have it dramatically increases a person's risk of becoming addicted.
Okay.
What we do know is whether it is genetic predisposition or it is environmental factors, experiences, trauma, whatever it might be, it is not the result of some people are good and some people are bad and the bad people use drugs and the good people don't. It is not at all related to that, which is why you have parents who will say, this is like my sweetest, most sensitive child. I hear this all the time. My most sensitive, most compassionate, big-hearted child is the one that struggles with addiction. It's the least one of all their children. They didn't think any of them were going to, of course, but it's always the one they think, man, I can't believe it was this child. It's not because they're a bad kid. It's because something is going on deep inside, and they are self-medicating that with drugs. That becomes a problem. And that person can engage in all sorts of really harmful behavior. But we've got to deal with the root cause of why they're using. And the more we can do that, the better. There's becoming more resources for families out there. There's a great book called Beyond Addiction. Highly recommend for family members to understand addiction and how they can help their loved one.
So your organization, I didn't mean to interrupt you, we're kind of running out of time. Just want to get your position on and what you're advocating for, which I believe is more towards regulation as opposed to prohibition. We got about 20 seconds left. Your thoughts on that?
Yep. And I think we got to start figuring out, how could this work? How could we take one step in that direction? Because if we want to see fewer people dying, if we want to see less crime, less cartel activity, we've got to figure out how to move that market out of their hands.
Gotcha. Christina Dent is the founder and president of End It for Good. Appreciate you coming on, Christina. Thanks.
Thanks.
We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Well studio at 12:05. It's Senator Daniel Sparks.
Washing all our worries down the drain. Rain is a good thing. Rain is a good thing. Rain is a good thing. Rain is a good thing.
From the Talk, Mississippi.
It's time for
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Wash away my troubles, wash away my pain, with the rain and Shambhala. Wash away my sorrow, wash away my shame, with the rain and Shambhala.
We are back in the Element Well studio. Thanks so much for joining us. Friend just texted me, said, great interview with Christina. She is sharp. No doubt about it. The one thing that I totally agree with her on, and it's not a secret, I've said this many times on the program, I don't know how on board I am with just, complete legalization of everything. I've got some issues with that requires more thought, more consideration, and honestly, more understanding of what the consequences would be. But one thing I definitely agree with is I don't care what kind of laws and regulations and rules and security and everything else we put in place. People that want to put that stuff in their body are going to figure out a way to get it. I just believe that. And that's what makes it so complicated. And so I think we ought to address this issue more at the root cause is, why do you want to put the stuff in your body? How do we address that? I saw, just thinking about that, a report the other day that shows that our status among all world nations measured in terms of happiness has plummeted. Have you seen this? I mean, we're like way down the list now, falling, like 40th or something like that. I was just shocked. Why are we so unhappy? There's so much to be happy about. Why are we so unhappy? I struggle with that.
Because one major political party gains power and prestige by convincing their voters that they are unhappy.
I do think that's the case. I mean, I think back when I took one for the team and watched every single Hillary Clinton rally when she was a candidate for president in the general election, and even prior to the general election during the primary. And the central message and theme, to your point, of every single Hillary Clinton rally was, your life sucks, but I'm going to fix it for you. That was every dang rally. It's like I didn't need to waste 30 minutes, an hour, listening to her bloviate there on the stage. Her message was, everything sucks. I'm going to fix it for you, though. That's just incredible. And I do believe you're right. And then, wouldn't you also agree that many of our young people, they get fed these lines in their educational settings, often by these left-leaning educators, which dominate the education community. We know that now. That's proven. And that hasn't changed. I think the difference is that party has changed. We're not talking about the freedom-loving liberals of the 60s, right? Let's go do drugs and what was it, Dr. Timothy?
Although it does appear that all those hippies that survived that era are the most insufferable people you'll ever meet.
No doubt about it. I actually think that's why we have a lot of problems today, is because of that. But it morphed. It evolved.
Many of them, not
that's
all,
right.
Of course.
Timothy Leary, what was it? Turn on, tune in, drop out. Remember him? And what he was talking about, him with his smock, his toga, whatever the heck you call that thing, his little beads, his puka beads, up there on the stage at Berkeley. Tune in, turn on, drop out. If you aren't familiar with this, it's the 60s, and it's the LSD generation. And that's what he's talking about. Go get high on LSD. This professor, was encouraging this. Drop out, man. Drop out of school. What are you doing here? This guy got paid to be a professor in school, and he's encouraging students. Drop out. I just feel like we're paying the price for that attitude back then. But at least they weren't destructive. Not to the extent it is today. I know you're thinking about that. Not to the way it is today.
When you look at student-led protests of the 60s, they weren't exactly non-violent.
No, I agree. But most of that was protesting the war, the Vietnam War. But again, that to a great extent was a cause. But it's also true that we had the draft, and many were concerned about that and dodging the draft. Who could forget that? And, of course, if you had connections, you could get a waiver. That's what the We talked about it yesterday, right? The Fortunate Son CCR song. That's exactly what that's talking about, written during that time period. I ain't no senator's son. I got to go, right? I mean, it's true.
Because Fogarty went.
That's exactly right. Of CCR. Yep. So I ain't no senator's son. What a great line. This is just one of the best lines in rock music history. But I don't know why everybody's so dang unhappy. We got to be happier. That's not to say that we don't have problems. We're condemned to having problems because we're humans. And God said, you got to go do a little time there on the earth and prove you're worthy to receive eternal happiness. That's the way it works. But, man, you got to make the best of it. You got to see the positive side of things. This is not unique to any particular party, but I totally agree with you. There is one party that thrives on telling people how bad everything is, how bad the country is, how bad your life is. And now it's AOC and Bernie Sanders running around the country holding these rallies. Fight oligarchy. They don't even know what the hell that is.
No.
Honestly. It's just incredible. Fight oligarchy. I mean, what kind of political message is that? What does that mean? Oh, geez. I know we're off on a bit of a tangent and a rant there, but I just kind of had to get that off out of my system. That I looked at that and think, just there's a lot of cause for happiness and enjoyment. Good grief, we're so blessed in this country. Even under the worst conditions, we're better off than the majority of the world. And it's because they've never fully embraced the systems that made this country so great. It's unique in that respect. And that doesn't mean we don't constantly seek to improve, but of course we do. Our founders told us that. And our founding documents even stated. We get it, because we're flawed humans. But man, these people that constantly focus on, dwell on the stains of our past, you talk about insufferable. They're just miserable people when they see everything through that lens, man. Good grief. Grow up, get a life, do something productive. It'll make you feel better about yourself as well. Well, here in Mississippi, we're going to be talking to Senator Daniel Sparks in the next segment, and we'll get into the weeds with him a little bit on the tax reform legislation and the drafting error. And also, he's the one responsible in the state Senate for the new creation of the new Tier 5 in PERS, the Public Employees Retirement System, which has been embedded, inserted in the tax bill. And our news department reports, you probably heard it on the break, that the governor is going to sign this legislation today. Now, I think Monday, Rhino, we thought, well, maybe it looks like there's a possibility they'll jump in a conference and maybe make some changes and adjustments and concessions. That's usually what happens in conference. But at this point, looks like it's destined for the governor's signature later today. But the creation of this Tier 5 in PERS has received, as you can imagine, lots of criticism. I know you're shocked at that. By both current employers in their concerns about being competitive in the marketplace to bring on new talent, and also existing retirees and active members who feel this stops short of the funding necessary to stabilize the program. Speaking of funding, something that you may have seen is the president, through his Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, he's been the one that's most talked about this, has discussed the possibility of exempting all those who earn less than $150,000 a year in this country from federal income tax. So I did a little mathematical research on what that would mean to the Treasury primarily, and how many people that would affect. And the results may surprise you a bit. We'll talk about that on the other side of the break. We are in the Element Wealth studio. We're going to wrap up hour 2 of the program in the next segment, and then stay tuned for the afternoon portion with Senator Daniel Sparks.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
All right, we are back
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Talking about a proposal from the president to exempt everyone who makes $150,000 and less from federal income tax. So that would, of course, make the tax structure even more progressive than it is, which simply means progressive means, hey, the more you make, the more you pay. And that's because essentially you would reduce the rolls of those who pay income taxes dramatically. In fact, about 20% of taxpayers would actually owe any federal income tax. 80% would be exempt. So we would be completely reliant on, in terms of the population, this is fair to say, a handful of households to fund the entire dang federal government. And I find that a bit concerning at a minimum, that we would place so much of the burden on the upper incomes. But it would also mean that we would blow a hole in the budget by about $600 billion. Now, we're already running $2 trillion deficits, and it doesn't necessarily work out, and we know that from history, and especially if you know anything about the Laffer curve, it doesn't necessarily mean dollar for dollar everything that is generated today under the current tax structure. If you changed the rates and the brackets, that means, 100% of that is lost. Doesn't always work that way. There's other situations where there's other results that occur. So, say, for example, if you kept all your money, and the person making $150,000 in general, about $24,000 is what that worth. Well, let's say you went and spent that $24,000. Not saying you would, but you're going to spend a fair amount of it, I think it's fair to say. You got more disposable income. Well, because you're spending more, consuming more, well, who are you buying that from? Corporations who pay corporate income taxes, right?
Yep.
So, and guess what also happens? Generally, wages go up. And the other thing that might result, the opposite of that is corporations say, well, wait, I don't have to give raises because the government just gave everybody a raise by exempting the income tax.
And from the political perspective, if you were trying to push for a major cut, that would be the most palatable way to sell it.
Oh, I agree. Now,
hey, we got to cut this, but because we're cutting that, all of y'all don't have to pay taxes anymore.
Yeah. What's not clear, because I've researched it, I can't figure it out, is, are we talking about just changing this tax system we have today for those who make less than $150,000, they're exempt? or is the first $150,000 of income exempt for all taxpayers?
That is a big difference.
Yeah, and I hadn't been able to ascertain that, and I can't find, because right now it's just, there's no like, here's a formal plan. It's just been discussed, as a proposal.
I would imagine it would be the first $150,000 would be exempt. That would be the new
I agree.
0% tax bracket.
Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that when Lutnick has discussed this, he's also discussed exempting Social Security, those earnings from Social Security and Medicare. The president believes that tariffs are going to generate sufficient income to offset this. But right now, Mr. President, the math doesn't work. He said yesterday he thinks his 25% tariff would produce somewhere between $600 billion and $1 trillion. It would take a year to get there. That doesn't work, sir. The 25%, when you consider the total value of imported vehicles and imported parts that would be subject to the 25% tariff in today's dollar terms, it's about $500 billion. It would generate about $100 to $120 billion, not $600 billion to $1 trillion. There's a big delta there. And the other thing, Rhino, to keep in mind is if the goal of reshoring all those manufacturing facilities is realized, well, then there's no tariffs. So you don't have any revenue. You see how complicated and convoluted when you consider all the massive amount of moving parts
you don't have
in this
the tariffs,
equation.
but then you have the corporate tax.
I agree, and you'd have to do some math to figure out, how those work out. I get it. Interesting times for sure that are upon us, and gosh, it'll give us plenty to talk about. That's for sure. But we're stepping aside right now. That's because it's top of the hour. That means Fox News, Super Talk News coming your way. And then we'll visit with Senator Daniel Sparks.
And now, another hour of the talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Begin your transition now.
Now on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio on this
Friday Eve.
We're kicking in gear, the afternoon portion of the program now with Senator Daniel Sparks. He represents District 5, which includes Itawamba, Prentiss, and Tishomingo counties. Serves as the chair of the Economic and Workforce Development Committee, Vice Chair, Judd B. Committee. Always good to see you, Senator. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Gerard. Good to be with you. Always enjoy a visit.
I don't know if I shared with you that back before Christmas, I was honored to travel up to J.P. Coleman State Park. Tishomingo County was invited by Representative Bubba Carpenter over on the House side. There's, I can't remember the name of it, the Development Foundation, I think.
That's correct.
Economic
yes.
Group. And it's that part of the state's just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, and it's so different than the rest of the state. We're blessed in Mississippi with the multiple landscapes.
We are, and I regret I wasn't able to be there that night when you were there, but they did brag on you as well.
Oh,
you did a wonderful job.
I appreciate that.
But I'm very fortunate that that's home. It's been home to my parents, to my grandparents. We've been a big part of Northeast Mississippi in our lives, and the people are as good as the beauty. So,
no doubt.
Good people.
No doubt. Enjoyed so much being with them. They were so accommodating, so gracious, and I appreciate them giving me a little time to present some stuff to them, and that was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that. All right, so you have been spearheading shall we say, some reforms to attempt to stabilize the public employees retirement system, also known as PERS. In full disclosure to the audience, you and I have had many offline conversations about this. Always enjoy those. And I'll tell the audience this, that you may disagree with the senator's policies here, but one thing you can't disagree with is whether or not he understands this problem and understands what has to be done to fix it. And I appreciate that. You and I have had lots of exchanges on that, and sometimes I'll sort of hit you with some questions. Are you sure about this, that, and the other? And you always do a great job of, no, here's why, and you'll substantiate your position with mathematical financial data, which is the way it should be, because this is a financial mathematical problem.
It is. It most certainly is, and it touches so many lives in the state of Mississippi with over 100,000 active employees, over 100,000 retirees, and as I've told people before, either someone's spouse, parent, or child is likely on PERS, and sometimes all three. And the one thing I've always been very clear about, the employees have done their part. The employees have rendered the service, whether they're a current employee or a retiree. They have earned their benefits. They are in their tier. They're locked in. Nothing in this legislation would change any benefit they have. The purpose of this legislation is to strengthen the system, because whatever decisions have been made in the past, and we'll certainly talk about some of those, has led us to a $26.5 billion, with a B, unfunded actuarial accumulated liability. So what we've been doing has put us in financial duress as it relates to actuaries, believing we're now below the yellow line and into the red. And so we needed to do something different. Last year, a bill came over from the House, 1590, that purported to disband the board in its current composition and encourage the board to put together a Tier 5. The board asked for a Tier 5 last year. The members of the PERS were very upset, and they expressed that in communications directly to us on the Senate side once that House bill came over, that they wanted to elect their board members, that their board members had their best interest in mind, their board members were experts in the field, and they trusted their board members, and that the legislature should listen to the board members. So this past year, after we got out of session, I was appointed as a legislative liaison member of the PERS Board of Trustees by the Lieutenant Governor. He has 2 appointments in the House. Speaker has 2 appointments. So we worked the last several months with the PERS Board, with the same group of people that they last year asked us to listen to, and we worked with them to craft a Tier 5 that ultimately received an endorsement of the PERS Board on December 18th in their board meeting. It was presented by their actuaries in November. It was rediscussed again in the December meeting and was voted on, and it was a 8-1 vote to endorse the framework of the Tier 5, which is what we presented in the Senate and what ultimately is an HB 1 that the governor, I believe, is intending to sign today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I'm going to back up just for a minute and assume that there may be some in our audience that don't understand what actuaries do. And these are just people that work with retirement systems, defined benefit plans such as PERS, but mainly they work for insurance companies and they estimate risk. Their job is to use a bunch of statistical modeling to try to figure out what risk is. Because if you think about premiums coming in and benefits going out, that's not static. That's very dynamic.
That's correct.
And you're trying to essentially estimate what that looks like and make sure that your plans, your programs, your financial model is stable to accommodate those risks, and that you've got those risks addressed and mitigated. The risk we have here is that if we don't do something, we're not going to be able to make benefits in full down the road a long time. We want to be clear. It's not like next year this is going to be a problem. Not the dire situation Social Security and Medicare are in, where we're looking at within the decade.
That's
that
correct.
Becomes a problem.
We have $26.5 billion of that actuary-determined unfunded liability. We have $35 billion of assets.
Right.
So the other thing is what you touched on. The board also makes the decision for the plan, for the investments, all of those different things, and the actuaries are making educated guesses.
That's right.
Because there they're having to use mortality tables about people's death. They're having to use other guesstimates. And one of the problems in the prior tier was that there was so many different ways you could accumulate service time for which no one had paid in money.
Right.
And it would skew the numbers. Partial lump sum option of taking money, you cannot actuarially forecast that. So some of the ups and downs that we've had in PERS is because of the uncertainty, and we're trying to bring more certainty into it to stabilize. And then, of course, the additional concerns were that the board made some decisions to lower the estimated rate of return from 7.75 to 7 within the last 5 years, and that actually inflated the liabilities by $6 billion roughly. And that doesn't mean they lost $6 billion.
Right.
It just means in the future they're going to calculate a lower number. So we just, the board had asked us to do a tier. Even my colleagues, that some of them that didn't vote for the bill, admitted we have to have a different tier. This was the tier that was presented by the actuaries. This is the tier and the framework that the board endorsed, and it's the one we went with. Now, late in the game, somebody ran out with another defined benefit plan and said, well, if we'll just reduce the benefits, this is as good or better. It's not as good or better. The actuaries said as much. In 2064, it would be 10.5% less funded, which was $15 billion less funded. The other thing, and you understand this, and we can get into defined benefit and defined contribution, but when you have a defined benefit, all the risk is on the plan sponsor, which is not just the state. It's every school district.
Yeah,
it's
every
employer.
county.
Everybody owns a certain amount of that $26.5 billion. And I actually brought you a copy of the breakdown to the penny of everybody's piece of that. So it's not like they're looking at the state and going, well, the legislature has to handle this. This is all our counties, all our school districts, our IHL institutions, our community colleges. Each of them have a piece of this debt, this liability, on their books.
That's
GASB
right.
requires it. The Financial Accounting Standards requires it. And it's ultimately going to affect our bond rating. So when we get to the point that you can't bond for a new building on an IHL campus, or DeSoto County, which has $697 million of this liability just in their school system because they're the largest school system. DeSoto County has some sewer and water issues up there that we're trying to work as a legislature to help them because of working with Memphis and over the years. They're going to have to spend some major infrastructure dollars. They've had tremendous growth. If it hurts that county's ability to bond, because they have to disclose $697 million of, that's just the school district's
right.
debt. That's why we needed to do something. It's not to hurt anybody's hiring abilities. It's not to reduce someone's benefit. It is to stabilize this plan before it affects the state of Mississippi and our subunits of government ability to bond and function.
It's a great point, because I'm not sure that the majority of our public understands that the audited financial statements produced for every public sector entity in the state that has employees that participate in PERS, which is every one of them, they have a significant footnoted section in their financial statements disclosing their portion of the PERS liability. And to your point, just so our audience will know, when they get ready to go borrow money is really what we're talking about, when that goes to the market, they look at those financial statements, they see that liability, they get a little nervous, and they either don't approve the bond or they approve it at a higher interest rate to mitigate that risk.
So it costs them money, and these same people last year, when the board wanted to raise the rate by 5%, said we can't stand it. We're already paying 17.4, and
right.
if we had gone to 22.4, that's a 5% cost on labor to every school district, every IHL, every city, every county.
Right. Daniel Sparks is our guest in the Element Wealth studio. He's a senator from up there in northeast Mississippi. We're coming right back to talk about PERS. Stay with us.
Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk Mississippi.
We are back in the Element Wealth studio. We're visiting with Senator Daniel Sparks talking about PERS. So let's also do this, Senator. Back up and explain to our audience exactly what a tier is?
Oh, that's a great question. I had somebody ask me the other day, why are you doing this Tier 5? I didn't pull that number out of thin air. We have 4 prior tiers, so this is not something unprecedented. And again, I want to make sure people understand nothing in this tier affects the rights of people in Tier 1 through 4.
Or current retirees.
That's right, every one of those folks. But we've toggled this thing. In 1990, there was a piece of legislation that did an optional retirement program. I'll circle back to that. That was just for institutions of higher learning. In 1999, a cost of living adjustment, 3% compounded, was added. In the past, the board had to vote on each year what the cost of living should be, kind of like Social Security does. Mm-hmm. But they fixed that in 99, and they did it retroactively to people that had not paid in on it. And, of course, we've been paying this benefit. That has been a big part of the PERS liability. But once again, these employees and retirees, that's the deal they bargained for, and we owe it, and we're going to pay it. But those are the things that put us where we are. Then they began to see some issues. Around 2007 or so, they tweaked again. They went from 25-year to 30-year retirement. And then in 2011, they tweaked the system again. So they've gone in and tried to do these little adjustments to the plan, and they continue to dig us deeper and deeper into debt. So the people who are saying, hey, just do this defined benefit plan that, a board member, by the way, the board speaks through their minutes, and I'm going to leave you a copy of these minutes on this 8-1 vote. But just because a board member goes out and on a personal mission begins to push a plan, that's their right as a citizen. But the board endorsed this plan, this Tier 5.
Okay.
But that is kind of what we've been dealing with is, do you just tweak it again, or do you actually go in and try to stabilize it? So that's what we're trying to do, in addition to more money. We know more money is necessary. The legislature voted last year to increase the employer side of the contribution by 2.5% over 5 years, half a point each year. That is several $100 million more dollars that will go into the system. We also put $110 million in last year. I believe the lieutenant governor stated the other day it's his desire to put $200 million in this year. And then we have part of this reform to the ORP package is going to deliver an incremental climbing of $2.5 million up to $40 million annually. So 8 to 10 years from now, we'll be picking up $30 to $40 million a year because of the reform that we did to the ORP program. Okay. That's without raising anybody's taxes. That's without going up on anything. So
explain that to the folks. This ORP program is something that's available to those that work for Institutes of Higher Learning.
Correct.
Right? It's limited to just them.
That just them, and even certain categories within that.
Other retirement plan, by the way, I think is what it stands
optional.
for. Optional. Pardon me.
The first thing you do, you come in, and if you are one of these quote qualifiers, then you're offered the first 30 days go into PERS with all of us, or opt out. So they opted out. The problem is, years ago, they tied the contribution to the PERS contribution rate. Well, as the debt has gone up, we've continually added more and more contribution rate. Well, the people in ORP were getting a match that was in the teens. It's 14.9% on their 9%. It's egregious.
So for the benefit of folks that are listening, if you're familiar with the standard private sector 401k plan, for example, you contribute to it, and your employer will also contribute something to it. Typically, it's less than a dollar for dollar match. It's correct. 50 cents on a dollar is a fairly common model. But in this particular case, the ORP offered to these employees of Mississippi's colleges and universities, they actually get almost a double match. I mean, it's completely inconsistent with the typical private sector that goes to their personal plan, not going to the PERS program, and that's part of the reason we have this funding problem.
That's correct. 2.5% went to PERS. So I had a lot of back and forth. I understand the IHL's position on it. It's a great deal if you could get it. But it's $503 million worth of payroll. So the IHL's putting up almost $100 million of match, and 2.5% of that is all that's coming to PERS. Going forward, and we're not going to clip a current ORP participant. We're going to freeze them where they are. As the rate continues to go up on the other side, more of that will go to PERS. So we are generating more money. Any future ORP hire will be up to 9%.
Which is the amount they contribute.
That's right.
We're matching it dollar for dollar.
That's correct. And we're going to pick up an additional 7.5%. So if we keep this roughly $500 million worth of payroll, you can see how 8, 10, 12 years out, I'm going to pick up $7.5 million per $100 million. So I'm getting $30 or $40 million going toward directly to the unfunded actuarial liability. We are also looking at taking part of the 2% set aside, taking a piece of that and dedicating it to PERS funding. We want to get to that $100 million figure roughly. I realize the House had taken the lottery money up to $100 million. I didn't support doing it that way because I feel like that $80 million that's been going to MDOT has been doing a good thing. The next 20 goes to EEF, which is education funding. And the problem was one of the differences in the two tax plans was that because they took that $100 million away from MDOT and EEF, they then wanted a greater gas tax increase. So they were going out and telling PERS community, and the PERS people picked up on this because they're asking us, where's our dedicated stream of funding? And I promise you, we are working on that, and we intend to deliver on it. But we're not going to raise your taxes to do it if we can help it. And that's what was happening.
Okay.
They were going to divert $100 million, but then raise your gas taxes to pay for that piece of it.
I mean, you could, I think, make the case that essentially we're paying for PERS at the gas pump.
You would have been
if you're taking
gone that route. That's right.
And the reason I say that is because we're eliminating the dedicated stream of revenue from the lottery.
Yeah, but we didn't.
Right, I know.
Yeah,
talking about the House bill.
That's exactly what it would have done.
Yeah.
You're correct.
100%. So essentially, rather than lottery proceeds funding roads and bridges to the tune of $80 million a year, we're eliminating that, diverting that to PERS, but then we're increasing taxes on fuel, which is generates more than the $80 million. That's because right. I think most people believe, in the legislature at least, that Department of Transportation needs more than $80 million a year. They're getting that now, but. Yeah, so this is a conundrum. The point I wanted to make about the tiers is that it depends on when you entered the system, when you went to work
100%.
For the system. And so through the years, those were adjusted for the number of years it requires to vest and the number of years that determine your average pay and some of the calculation formulas that determine benefits. And also the contribution rates changed somewhat through the years as well.
That's exactly right. Each tier had a different calculation of benefits.
It's a different plan. Yeah.
But based on your date of hire. So Tier 5 employees have yet to be hired. So any Mississippi employee or retiree today, Tier 5 does not affect you.
Right.
So one of the things we're going to look at as well is potentially diverting interest on some of the money that we have setting aside, working cash stabilization fund. We're going to find $100 million to put toward it without raising your taxes. That is my commitment. That is what I'm trying to help push. And then the other thing we're going to start looking at, and I've talked with my fellow board members at PERS, we got a problem with contract labor in the state of Mississippi. I don't mind people contracting labor, but when you contract things out, and some of the offenders in the contract world are PERS retirees. They retire from PERS, they set out for 90 days, then they come back on contract. I have no problem with that. I'm proud that they have an opportunity to earn and enjoy their retirement, but there needs to be some calculation or assessment, if you will, on those types of contracts because otherwise they would be in PERS. I have a bus driver shortage up in our neck of the woods. We have retired bus drivers who want to drive, but they have a cap on this, 50% pay, 50% work, or 25% of your average wage. And so there are many things that we can do to help people continue to work, to help stabilize the system, even if they're in a situation that they're a retiree that want to go back and work on contract. But, the board is committed to finding more funding. The legislature is committed to finding more funding. But we had to have reform to the plan to make the funding make the impact it needs to make.
We may need to continue in the next segment, but let's do a rundown of what Tier 5 entails and how that differs from Tier 4.
Sure. Tier 4 was a defined benefit plan, which means based on the number of years you worked and your average salary over your high 4 years, you received a stream of income in the future for the rest of your life, and there was a cost of living adjustment that you received based on the 1999 legislation. The difference in Tier 5 is that you make the same employee contribution of 9%. 4% goes to a defined benefit, so it's a future flow of income. It has a lower service year credit. It does not have a guaranteed COLA, but we have the option to do that COLA, and it's based on your high 8 years. We allow military service credit for 4 years, and you have 8 years to vest. The disability rules haven't really changed. We don't allow partial lump sum because you have a defined contribution.
Which is current and available, I should say, in Tier 4.
Yes, because they didn't have any money to take with them.
Yeah.
The other 5% goes to a defined contribution 401k style plan. That's their money. It vests with them, and they could actually pierce that in the purpose of a hardship, illness, sickness. So it's money that our state employees actually have access to.
Gotcha.
Currently, it's only a future flow of income.
Yeah. So this is thought to, the actuaries have done the math, said, this will help us achieve stability.
Roughly 2% more on every dollar of payroll, which is $140 million on a $7.2 million payroll.
Senator Daniel Sparks, thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you
really
so much,
good job.
Rob.
Thank you. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Middays with Gerard Gibert. It is on SuperTalk Mississippi.
I recall when I was small, how I spent my days alone. The busy world was not for me, so I went and found my own. I would climb the garden wall with a candle in my hand. I'd hide inside a hole of rock and sand. On the stone and ancient.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. Thanks so much for joining us today. We've got Senator Daniel Sparks. Asked him to stay over and let's talk a little bit about taxes. But before we get there, just cleaning up and kind of wrapping up this discussion about the new tier in the public employees retirement system. So anybody that comes to work in the public sector in Mississippi, effective this July 1st, right?
March 1st of 26.
Okay, well, I may be having that confused with SLRP, which we probably, correct. I think I got them confused. My bad. Two different sets of dates. All right, so March 1st, 26, anybody that enters the system as a public sector employee for an employer where all the employees join the public employees retirement system, they're going to enter this new Tier 5, and in which case their contribution is going to remain the same at 9%, except under this new plan, 4% of that's going to the standard PERS program, although the benefits have changed considerably in Tier 5. 5% of their contribution, their 9%, is going to their defined contribution plan, which is equivalent to a standard private sector 401k plan. The state, however, the employer, is going to continue to contribute the same amount they do now for all PERS employees.
That's correct.
Except that only 9% of it, right, is going to their defined contribution plan. The rest of it's going to PERS. Did I get that right?
Well, it's close. The DB portion, that is correct. 4% is going in, and while people talk about from the employee, they talk about their benefits being less. That is less than half of what they're contributing currently.
Yeah, so they get less benefits.
Are in line
well,
with
sure.
it. The DC is money on behalf of the employee that belongs to the employee. The employer is continuing to put up the 17.9 that's going to 19.9, and that goes toward the UAL. There is not, as drafted in Tier 5, a dedicated match on the DC. There is a optional variable match. It's why they're looking at a 401A style plan so that can be done. Of course, the plan sponsor, the state, is responsible for the DB piece. So, yes, they're putting up to pay for the defined benefit.
Okay.
But there is not a definitive match going into the PERS employees' defined contribution. That is one of the ways that we're going to address some of our employer concerns, is that we're going to be able to offer optional variable matches that may help us to recruit or retain employees, but there is not a defined amount going into a defined contribution from the state.
I apologize. You know what? I confused that with the changes you're making in the ORP. That's where I got confused, where we are contributing.
That's correct.
But problem right now is we're contributing way more than the 9% they're putting in from the state side.
That's correct.
Under the current program, and your goal is to cap that. That's and correct. Have the state continue to contribute the same amount, but capping it to the amount that goes to the individual employees plan, leaves the rest of it to go to PERS to help out with the unfunded liability.
That's correct, to the tune of $35 to $40 million.
Okay. Yeah. So the employers have discretion to contribute more to the defined contribution portion under this new tier. The other main feature that we want to point out about this new tier is that cost of living adjustments are optional and would require legislation, right?
That's correct. Well, the legislature would determine, on an annual basis on a COLA. And Senator Hobb Bryan and I have had these conversations. Of course, Senator Bryan was around when all the other PERS legislation
was done. Only one in the Senate, right?
That's right. But he referred to a COLA for those. He calls it an old age COLA. He was referencing 70s. 70s, not near as old as it looked a few years ago. But I do agree with him, and the good thing is no Tier 5 employee has been hired yet. March 1st to 26th would be that hiring date, and they're 20 or 30 years away or more from retiring. Yeah. So by that time, if we've stabilized the system, the state has found a dedicated source of revenue, there will be a COLA. But actuarially, we can't put a fixed COLA in it, or it does not fix our problem.
That's what got us in trouble.
That's correct.
That's what got. All right, let's talk about taxes. We learned last week, of course, that the House was going to concur with the House bill that essentially got struck and replaced with the Senate plan, which also brought into it the Tier 5 program for PERS, which you had been involved in. There was a separate legislation that was included. We were all shocked last Thursday when we learned, wait, the House concurred, and then we found out subsequent that there's a misplaced decimal point or two in the language. And apparently the House said, yeah, we can live with this on this basis. Essentially, and it looks like the governor's going to sign it today. So it's essentially, the way I've kind of described it, Senators, that we really don't have any triggers, and that was the goal of the Senate, was to make sure that we achieve certain economic outcomes, if you will, or measurements that would make, I guess, everybody feel okay about reducing the income tax. I would say we really don't have any triggers at this point.
Well, first of all, I would congratulate those who celebrate the governor, Speaker White, Speaker Gunn, Chairman Lamar. This has been a point of major desire for them for several years, and so I think it's a positive thing for the state of Mississippi. We've had economic wins the last few years, and I think this is just one more draw. It's a positive. So I'm also quite proud of Chairman Josh Harkins and the Senate and Lieutenant Governor Hoseman, because we held the line from increasing Mississippian sales tax. Sales tax increase was going to be a 21.4% increase to go from 7% to 8.5%. So there are folks on both sides of this that are proud of what we're doing. The infrastructure piece with 3 cents over 3 years, $212 million to MDOT, that is a dedicated fund to them that goes to state aid, multimodal, and MDOT. All these things are good. Grocery tax goes from 7 to 5 immediately, or I say immediately, July 1st.
Yeah.
And we have 5 years of income tax that we already are doing, which is to go from 4.4 to 4 this coming year. Then we'll go from 4 to 3 over 4 years with quarter-point cuts. Then we get to the point that the debated triggers would come into effect. So we're 5 years away from that. So I don't want what some people seem to find humor, and we have a great political cartoonist, and he does a wonderful job drawing cartoons, but we're missing the forest for the trees. We've got 5 more years of returning taxpayer dollars to Mississippians before these triggers come into play. The other thing nobody talks about with the trigger, which, by the way, 85% of 1% is 0.0085, which is also 0.85%. So I would say I took my legislator hat off when people really started picking at the bill, and I put my lawyer hat on. And I've read the bill, and I think there's some very interesting language in the bill. So I'm excited the governor's signing it. I'm excited we're moving on the pathway. But there's a first trigger that everybody forgets about, and that's a full rainy day fund. So I heard some House members lamenting we were going to cut the entire income tax out in 1 year. I have no idea where they got that. But if we have financial downturn, the rainy day fund will not be full. Therefore, you don't go to the trigger calculation. There is no cut in that year. So I want to make sure Mississippians understand we are not foolishly eliminating the income tax. We are still moving in a methodical, conservative, reasonable approach to the elimination of the income tax, because you've been around and seen at times where governors had to reach into the rainy day fund to shore up budgets, because we have to run a balanced budget in Mississippi. We don't get to do what the federal government does. So they need to go back and read the bill a little bit more, because nobody's talked about the first part of the trigger, which is the cash stabilization fund, the rainy day fund being full. The Senate's position is that needs to move from 10% of appropriations to 12% of revenue, which will add about $300 million. And that's $300 million that I want the growth off of it to go where? You guessed it, PERS unfunded actuarial liability. We'll pick up another $12-15 million on that. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done. And I will go ahead and say this, and Chairman Harkins, I'm going to tell you, there's two types of people in this world. They're the type of people, when they hand a 10 at the cash register to pay for something, and the clerk reads it as 100 and gives you change for 100, there's the type of people who tell them and give the money back, and there's the type of people that walk out the door and spend it. And Josh Harkins is the type of guy that has the integrity to say, you need to get your money back. This is not what we bargained for. So I'm very proud of him and the work that he's done, and the Senate trying to find this pathway for our fellow Republicans. Because when we start talking about concessions amongst Republicans, that's how they talk in Washington when they talk about two different parties. So I'm excited the governor is going to put pen to paper today, because we will have done two things. We will have addressed the largest liability that the state of Mississippi faces, stabilizing PERS, and we will have cut the income tax and given opportunity in the future for elimination. And that's a good day in Mississippi, no matter which end of the building you're on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I hadn't really thought about, Josh mentioned it to me in passing, about the other aspect of the trigger, dealing with the budget stabilization fund, the rainy day fund. So bottom line is, if we're not throwing off excess cash, we don't even get to the trigger calculation.
Right. So it's a good day, but it's a reasonable day, and we also are committed not to borrow money to pay for this. We believe growth's going to pay for it. The proponents of the plan believe the growth's going to pay for it, and we expect them to do that. Hey, we'll send over clarification language in Senate Bill 3095, and they can sign it or not.
Senator Daniel Sparks has been our guest. Final segments next, folks.
Middays with Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
A modern day warrior, mean stride. Today's Tom Sawyer, mean pride.
We are back in the Element Well studio. We really appreciate Senator Daniel Sparks for hanging around with us, and we've been in some weeds there now, Rhino, and I hope that was good for you folks. I hope that explained and clarified a lot of what's going on. This is important, and the Senator makes a great point, Rhino. This affects us all, and I know that it can kind of hurt your head and kind of just cause you to say, I just want to tune that out, because you get into all these discussions of math and finance and economics and state budgets and stuff. But, it's important we pay attention to this, because often when we don't, and by the way, that clearly includes the people who make our laws, we end up with things down the road that we wake up and say, wait a second, I don't like that. And so it's important that we really focus on it when it's going through the process, to make sure that we get things right. And this is clearly a situation, and I appreciate both Senator Sparks and Senator Harkins for their efforts. And by the way, Jason White, Trey Lamar, folks on the House side, worked unbelievable amount of time on trying to get meaningful tax relief to Mississippians. Are there some disagreements about what that should look like? Sure. That's the way the process works. But you know what? Both are proceeding with the intention of helping out our fellow Mississippians and allowing them to keep more of their hard-earned money so that they can spend it the way they see fit as opposed to government. And so I applaud those efforts. And it looks like the governor's set to sign this thing. I didn't think about, but I did see that in the bill. I didn't think about the necessity for the rainy day fund and the budget stabilization fund to be at their statutory max before you can even apply the trigger. I was just making the point that the trigger's kind of worthless in that if we have a situation where we don't have, at least according to my calculations, an excess of revenue over expenses by about $4 million to take action on the tax rate, we got bigger problems. To that point, we got bigger fish to fry. I mean, that when you're talking about a $7+ billion budget, you're that dang close. Yeah, you need to step back and say, wait a second, we got to do something here. And I, like everybody else out there, would like to see the legislature continue to also invest some cycles in identifying areas to eliminate unnecessary spending. There's some opportunities for that, certainly as well. But by the same token, there are natural inflationary increases of operating a state government, and that's why it's necessary to make sure that we're rooting out all the unnecessary spending so that we can cover the natural, legitimate increases, such as salaries for government employees. Of course, on the other hand, the other side of that is, well, do we need all these employees? It's exactly what they're doing at the federal level, and similar exercise, I think, needs to be performed at the state level as well. And it does appear to be that there's an appetite for it. I'm hearing lots of talk about doing just that, perhaps forming a task force for that purpose that would incorporate folks from outside the capital confines, which I think would make a lot of sense. This new tier in PERS, I have heard employers say it's going to be more difficult. I've heard employers to hire new talent. I've heard employers say, no, this won't be any big deal, that young people that they're recruiting aren't worried about what their retirement benefits look like 30 years down the road. And the senator's right that by implementing this plan, we're still contributing from an employer taxpayer perspective the same amount, except less is going to the employee's dedicated plan, if you will, and more is going to the overall PERS fund. And that's the way this works. And that's why this would be of some aid in stabilizing the overall program. This was vetted by and essentially designed by the risk assessment people, and that's the actuaries. That's what they do. They're the ones that recommended this program. With respect to the income taxes, keep in mind that at a minimum, we're going from what you paid last year, 24, you're doing your tax returns on that right now, the 4.7% rate, that's getting down to 3% in 2030. So that's a 33%, more than 33% decrease in your taxes, what you paid last year versus what you're going to pay a short 4 years from now. That's significant unto itself. And then we start nibbling away at the 3% rate by a maximum of 0.3% per year based on attainment of certain economic triggers, which I think are going to be easily attained based on the decimal point misplacement in the legislation. That's it for us today. Tomorrow, I will be off speaking to an organization locally, and we'll have a guest host in for you. Back with you on Monday. Stay safe. God bless everyone.
Have you been seriously injured? Mama Justice is here for you. Our medical team partners with top-notch doctors, surgeons, therapists, and urologists, ensuring a comprehensive recovery journey. If you've been injured, call Mama Justice today. We're here for you.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.